China's Premier Li Keqiang said recently that China's economy faces new downward pressure. Oxford economist George Magnus warns China's property market debt could weigh on China and the global economy for years. Cathie Wood, aka the goddess of stocks in Taiwan or money tree in South Korea, suggests that China's asset bubble may burst the way Japan's did in the 1990s, which led to a stagnant economy. However, Bloomberg Economics' new research believes such comparisons are less meaningful than they might appear. Bloomberg's senior reporter on the Chinese economy, Tom Hancock, asserts that even with China's record trade surplus in October, it won't be enough to keep its growth from slowing further. The U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission approved a framework on November 5th to determine which U.S.-listed Chinese companies that fail to fully allow auditing inspection will be delisted from American capital markets. The U.S. SEC's new guidelines created an explicit procedure of what information and documents would be needed for assessing a foreign company if it is in compliance with U.S. securities law. SEC Chairman Gary Gensler said the Commission is on track to finalize rules to start implementing the delisting legislation before the end of the year. It is believed that none of the roughly 270 Chinese companies listed on U.S. exchanges comply with the rule. Oxford University is implementing the Phase 1 trial of their Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine for use in a nasal spray. An intranasal vaccine could target the virus at the point of entry into the body as well as in the bloodstream. With less virus in the nasal passages, the risk that vaccinated people spread the virus would decrease. On the contrary, a typical injection into the muscle could produce antibodies in the blood, though it won't necessarily be present in the nose and nasal passages. This means vaccinated individuals could still become infected and transmit the virus, which causes the nasal spray vaccine to be more attractive. But the scientists said this nasal spray vaccine might not be available for a year or more.
Hello, I'm Wade Lee. Thank you for joining us on this week's Fun Day News. Here are your top stories. According to official data, China's trade surplus reached $84.5 billion in October, exceeding analyst estimates. China's reserve reached $3.218 trillion at the end of October, up 0.53% from the previous month. However, secondary property transactions in 13 of China's major cities slid 42.8% year-on-year in October, the lowest level seen in 7 years. China's Premier Li Keqiang said that China's economy faced new downward pressures. However, he did not specify the extent of the new downward pressure or its cause. Oxford economist George Magnus warns China's property market debt could stagnate the sector for years, which impacts China and the global economy.
According to media reports, China's economy has slowed sharply in recent months as the property market crisis affects industries from construction to commodities, and a power crunch forced factories to decrease output, while draconian measures to curb the pandemic have reduced consumption. George Magnus, economist at the China Center at Oxford University, believes the debt problems facing China's property sector are likely to cause a period of stagnation which affects both China and the global economy. He thinks China's property market really has reached a tipping point now. After 2 decades of expansion, Beijing may no longer be willing or able to boost the market this time, because of the risk of egregious financial instability that might result. He thinks China's property market faces years of stagnation.
Professor Magnus is not the only one who perceives it this way. Bloomberg senior reporter Tom Hancock indicates that China's economy has been slowing in recent months due to Beijing's push to slow growth in the real estate sector. Li Keqiang's remarks came after further signs of weakness in October due to power shortages, which weighed on manufacturing, and strict coronavirus control, which put a brake on holiday spendings. He agrees with Professor Magnus' perception. Hancock believes that Beijing is in a difficult position and using the property market as a short-term stimulus is not an option.
We have mentioned that Cathie Wood has warned that China's asset bubble may burst. she called Beijing's efforts to reduce excessive borrowing in the real estate sector and cool house prices playing with fire. Tom Hancock finds that the problem is that China's gross domestic product, or GDP, is now so large that overseas demand cannot replace easing investment and consumer spending. As a result, the People's Bank of China began downsizing last year and has been under pressure to ease to support growth. It means that Beijing is in a difficult position, as many of the recent challenges in China's economy are on the supply side, such as power shortages and COVID-19 restrictions that curb consumption. While using the property market as a short-term stimulus is not an option, China is looking for a driver to boost its birdcage economy.
The U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission approved a framework on November 5th to establish a clear process of what information and documents are needed for assessing if a foreign company is in compliance with U.S. securities law. Currently, none of the roughly 270 Chinese companies listed on the U.S. exchange meet the requirement of the audit rule. Market analysis suggests that they are risking the implementation of the delisting process.
The adoption of the framework was seen as a step toward implementing the Holding Foreign Companies Accountable Act. The law states that any foreign companies listed on U.S. exchanges face delisting if they fail to turn over audit results for 3 straight years. With this rule, the Commission is on track to start implementing the delisting legislation before the end of the year. The U.S. SEC has said the audit requirements have been applicable to all foreign companies listed in the U.S. According to the SEC, China and Hong Kong are the only country or territory that house companies refusing to abide by the rules, and none of the roughly 270 Chinese companies listed on U.S. exchanges comply with the rule. Before the oral antiviral drug molnupiravir is approved for emergency use authorization around the world, all COVID-19 vaccine jabs are inoculated into the muscle. But antibodies aren't necessarily present in the nose and nasal passages. That means vaccinated individuals could still become infected and transmit the virus. The good news is that Oxford AstraZeneca COVID-19 vaccine is testing its nasal spray version, but it isn't likely to be available for a year or more. According to Oxford University's Our World in Data, the worldwide fully vaccinated rate is over 40.1%. Intranasal vaccines are an easier method of vaccination than inoculation into muscle. Nasal spray vaccines don't need to be administered by a trained health professional. And an intranasal vaccine could target the virus at the point of entry into the body. The less virus in the nasal passages also means the less risk that vaccinated people spread the virus. Oxford University is implementing the Phase 1 clinical trial to explore the use of the Oxford AstraZeneca COVID-19 nasal spray vaccine. The vaccine package is similar to over-the-counter hay fever nasal sprays. A volunteer said, after receiving the vaccine through his nose, that he could hardly feel it. It tasted quite sweet, and it had a sort of sugary taste.
And that's all the time we have for today. Thank you for joining us on this week's Fun Day News. Let's make every day a fun day. I am Wade Lee, your host, and I'll see you next time.